You're supposed to be dead. That's the first thing the stranger living in my mountain cabin said when I showed up with my own keys. I had bought that rundown place years ago, spent 3 long years restoring it board by board, and then left for 8 months to take care of my dying father. Now there was a family sitting at my table eating dinner, and they were holding a death certificate with my name printed across it. Michael Torres died last spring, the man told me, blocking the doorway. We bought this property legally through the HOA. But I was standing there in front of him, breathing, heart pounding, very much alive. How does someone erase you from existence and steal your home just by declaring you dead? If you've ever had your identity stolen, drop a comment, because this story only gets stranger. My homecoming ended with 6 hours inside a jail cell. 6 hours of watching neighbors slow their cars to a crawl outside the station, gawking through the window like I was some sideshow exhibit. The humiliation burned deeper than the handcuffs that had carved lines into my wrists. I kept repeating to myself, this can't be happening. This isn't real. But the cold concrete bench beneath me and the sour disinfectant in the air said otherwise. The arresting officer kept muttering under his breath about crazy folks claiming to be dead. I wanted to scream that I had proof, my driver's license, my social security card, my credit cards, everything, all showing that I was alive. The Johnson family had truly been terrified when I burst into what I thought was my home. Their teenage son had been in the middle of a video game on my custom-built entertainment setup. The moment he saw me, he screamed like he'd seen a ghost, which, from their perspective, I guess he had. Mrs. Johnson, visibly pregnant and clutching her toddler, backed up against the wall while her husband grabbed a bat from behind the door. "Stay back," he yelled. "I don't know how you crawled out of your grave, but you're not welcome here." The whole moment was so surreal that I almost laughed, except none of it was remotely funny. These people weren't crooks or scammers. They were just as frightened and confused as I was. When Officer Miller showed up, I laid everything out for him, ID, documents, proof of ownership, but the Johnsons had their own pile of papers, including an official-looking death certificate with my name, birth date, and all the proper seals and signatures. It looked completely legitimate. "Sir," Officer Miller said gently, the way someone does when they think you're unstable, "I understand you believe this is your property, but these people have legal purchase documentation. You'll have to take it to court." I tried explaining that I'd been in Denver caring for my dying father, that my HOA payments were on autopay, that nothing about this made sense. None of it mattered. On paper, I was a dead man trespassing on property that now belonged to someone else. What unsettled me most was how perfect everything inside the cabin looked. When I left, I'd covered my furniture, locked up, and made sure everything was spotless. Now, the Johnsons had moved in completely, but they'd kept most of my handmade furniture. My dining table, which I'd spent 3 months crafting, still stood in the same spot, now supporting their family meals. The custom shelves I'd cut to match the cabin's odd angles were filled with their kids' books and framed photos. It felt like walking into a mirror version of my life. Same place, different people living it. Mrs. Johnson had even kept my herb garden alive, the one I'd planted to cope with the stress of watching my father fade away. Sitting alone in that cell, I kept replaying the look in her eyes, genuine pity when she whispered, "I'm sorry. We didn't know. We were told the previous owner had been dead for over a year." The HOA showed us pictures of this place looking wrecked, broken windows, weeds everywhere, like it had been abandoned. But that was impossible. I'd maintained that cabin religiously for 4 years. When I left, everything was pristine. I'd even arranged for a neighbor to keep an eye on it, though I never heard from them after I moved. The more I thought about it, the more questions piled up like snowdrifts across a mountain road. The worst part was seeing my belongings shoved into boxes in the garage. Photo albums from my late wife Sarah's illness, tools I'd collected over decades of carpentry, even the rocking chair I built for the grandchildren we never had. The Johnsons had tried to be respectful, but seeing your entire life labeled previous owner's items felt like a new kind of grief. I'd built that cabin after Sarah died, a sanctuary where I could heal, surrounded by the quiet of the mountains. Every beam, every nail, every pane of glass had been part of that healing. And now it felt like I was mourning her, and my life, all over again. Then Sandra Williams appeared at the police station like a storm in heels. I'd known Sandra for years, the HOA president, a sharp woman in her 60s who always seemed to know everything about everyone in our little community. She walked in like she owned the place, and within minutes, the officer was treating her like royalty. "Officer," she said firmly, "I can confirm this man's identity. Michael Torres has been a resident of our community for 4 years. There's been a serious mistake." She even came armed with a folder full of HOA records, payment receipts, membership documents, everything that proved I was who I said I was. I could have hugged Sandra right there in that cold, fluorescent police station lobby. But as she guided me toward the exit, nodding politely to the officers, her voice dropped low enough that it prickled the back of my neck. "Officers, mark this under Phase 2, Identity Dispute Escalation. I'll forward the documentation." The phrasing hit me wrong. Too rehearsed. Too official. The way she said it carried that strange blend of sympathy and protocol that made me realize this nightmare wasn't anywhere near over. As we walked toward her car, one question looped in my head. Why was Sandra Williams, a woman who barely spoke to me outside HOA meetings and small talk about gutter repairs, suddenly acting like my savior? Maybe it was intuition, or the kind of paranoia that takes root when your reality starts to crumble, but her eagerness felt off. Still, Sandra's guest room felt like heaven compared to 6 hours locked in a holding cell. She insisted I stay, just until things settled down, and honestly, I didn't have many alternatives. The local motel was packed with tourists chasing fall colors, and I couldn't exactly afford a trip back to Denver just to catch my breath. She made up the bed with lavender-scented sheets and even left out a neat basket of toiletries, like I was some kind of honored guest instead of a man fresh from a police booking. But her kindness came wrapped in curiosity. She wanted to know everything, every timeline, every account, every detail, and her questions were polished, practiced, like an interviewer sizing me up for a role I hadn't applied for. By mid-morning, her dining table had transformed into a kind of investigation command post. She slid a flat canvas tray toward me filled with opened envelopes, corners curled, red ink bleeding through from HOA stamps, utility bills creased where someone had folded them with gloved precision. My name flashed over and over, a headline I couldn't escape. Sandra set a metronomic rhythm with her fingers, stamp, barcode, date, envelope, each item placed in a perfect line. She didn't lecture. She arranged. A forwarding slip here, a cutout signature there, peeled from old forms like pieces of evidence waiting for numbered markers. Then she pushed a stack of auto-pay printouts toward me. I opened my banking app, letting the pale blue screen light the paper trail. Every withdrawal matched, the same days, same amounts, but not the same pattern. It wasn't a clerical mistake. It was deliberate. Coordinated. Like someone had flipped a hidden switch in the system to redirect my existence. Somewhere, an address had been changed, a database checkbox ticked, a phone routing tree rerouted to silence. Watching her work, quick and precise, I realized how neatly everything fit together, and how that neatness was the most terrifying part. This hadn't started today. It had been unfolding quietly for months, maybe longer, while someone learned exactly how to make the world say I was dead. As we combed through box after box of stolen mail, Sandra began sketching a picture of a larger, organized scheme. "I've seen property fraud before," she said, her tone that of a seasoned insider. "Usually it's someone on the inside, someone with access to records. Someone who knows when homeowners will be vulnerable." She leaned forward, eyes narrowing. "Think carefully, Michael. Who knew about your father's illness? Who knew you'd be gone so long?" Her questions came too neatly shaped, guiding me down certain paths. It should have made me pause. But after everything, I was just relieved someone believed me at all. When she handed me the death certificate again, it looked even more convincing under the afternoon light. My social security number was correct. My birth date, my address, all perfect. But the ink over the last 2 digits of my SSN was thicker, like the pen had hesitated. The listed cause of death was identical to the one on my father's medical report, word for word. The raised seal bit cleanly into the paper without fraying it, and the notary stamp overlapped a signature at a tilt no local clerk ever used. Sandra traced her fingers along the margins like a museum guide, showing me the forgery's artistry without saying a word. Whoever had created it hadn't just stolen my data, they'd studied my entire life, every document, every habit. What chilled me most were the personal errors that felt deliberate. The form listed my father as the informant, even though he'd been gone 3 months before it was filed. It named Sarah, my late wife, as my surviving spouse, though she'd died 5 years ago. Whoever had done this had combed through my family's pain and turned it into paperwork. "Whoever's behind this knows you intimately," Sandra said quietly. The word intimately landed wrong. Too close. Too knowing. This wasn't about profit or property. This was personal, like someone wasn't just trying to steal my home, but wipe out any proof I'd ever lived there. As the daylight faded and the table filled with piles of documents, Sandra's unease grew more visible. She kept glancing toward the windows, then pulling the curtains shut a little tighter each time. "The person who forged this," she whispered, her voice flat and certain, "they're watching us right now. Don't turn around." The words struck like a slap. The idea that someone might be observing us, that our search for truth might be drawing danger closer, changed everything. What had started as a mystery now felt like a hunt, and I wasn't sure which side I was on. For the rest of the day, I couldn't stop checking my reflection in the darkened glass, scanning every passing car, every sound outside, wondering if I was already too deep in something meant to erase me completely. My brother Dave had always been the successful one in our family. While I bounced between renovation jobs and small contracts, he'd built an empire in real estate. Dave had built a solid contracting company, government contracts, luxury remodels, steady residential work. When I'd scraped together the dream of buying that old mountain cabin 4 years ago, he'd been the one who co-signed my loan, walked me through the forms, and vouched for me with the bank. We'd partnered on several projects, shared tools, clients, and trust. Which meant he'd had access to everything. My finances, my social security number, my digital records. Sandra had sown the suspicion so gently that I didn't even realize it was hers. "Think about it, Michael," she'd said the next morning over breakfast, her voice calm and deliberate. "Who else had your P.O. box key? Who else knew you'd be away for months caring for your father?" The more I replayed her questions, the more her theory started feeling like my own revelation. The puzzle pieces clicked together with the kind of precision that only happens in nightmares. The confrontation came that same afternoon in the parking lot of Dave's office, under the eyes of his crew and clients watching through the windows. I'd driven there straight from Sandra's house, fury thrumming through my veins. "Dave!" I yelled as he stepped out of his truck, still wearing his safety vest and tool belt. "We need to talk now." At first, he looked confused, then worried when he saw the exhaustion on my face. "Mike, what are you doing here? I thought you were still in Denver." When I accused him of rerouting my mail, forging my death certificate, selling my cabin, his confusion turned into something deeper, something that looked almost like heartbreak. "Are you serious right now?" he said quietly. "You think I'd do that to you? Steal from family? Mike, you sound insane." But I'd already been primed for this. Sandra had shown me evidence, grainy security footage that supposedly showed Dave at the post office redirecting my mail, banking records with strange transfers around the time my autopay vanished, even a forensic report claiming his fingerprints were on the forged certificate, and my frayed, desperate state. I believed her completely. "You intercepted everything!" I shouted, grabbing his shoulders. "Every notice, every letter. You used my own trust against me." The hurt flashing across his face should have stopped me, but rage had replaced reason. The fight that followed was ugly and fast. Dave, solid from years of lifting lumber and steel, blocked most of my swings easily, but not before my fist connected with his jaw. The sound it made, sharp and hollow, was like something breaking that could never be fixed. In seconds, we were on the pavement, rolling in front of horrified onlookers. Someone yelled for security. Steel-toed boots scuffed concrete, a dropped pallet crashed somewhere behind us, and I caught the faint smell of spilled coffee as a voice whispered, "Brothers! How could family do this?" Another shouted. "Fighting over money?" The humiliation hit like fire. To be seen like that, to have our family imploding in public, was worse than the pain of Dave's counterpunches. Security pulled us apart before it went any further. My face throbbed. His lip bled. We were both shaking. "Mike," he said between breaths, eyes searching mine. "I don't know what's happened to you, but you need help. Real help." He tried to embrace me. I shoved him away. I was too far gone, too sure of the narrative Sandra had built for me. She'd made it so easy to believe. Dave had access, opportunity, motive. He'd mocked my cabin before, called it a money pit. His concern now looked like guilt. His denial looked like performance. As the guards escorted me off the lot, I caught Sandra's voice nearby. She stood by her car, speaking quickly into her phone. "Yes, he took the bait perfectly," she said. "The brother never suspected a thing." Her tone was clinical, detached. I was too shaken to question it. At the time, I assumed she was talking to a lawyer, or some investigator she'd hired. It never even crossed my mind that I might be the one who'd taken the bait. The mind's a funny thing. It filters out anything that doesn't fit the story you've already decided is true. And I was certain my brother had betrayed me. By nightfall, word had spread through the entire valley. The Torres brothers had come to blows over money and stolen property. The gossip spread faster than the mountain wind. Dave's reputation, once bulletproof, began to crack. If his own brother's calling him a thief, people murmured, maybe there's truth to it. Clients started postponing jobs. A few canceled outright. The hardware store that had extended him credit for years suddenly wanted payment up front. I should have seen the collapse of his good name as a warning that something didn't add up, but instead, it felt like confirmation. Proof that I'd been right all along. Sandra stayed close through all of it. She documented the fight, comforted me afterward, and helped me build the case. She'd pat my arm, her voice low and warm. "I know this is painful," she said as we sat in her kitchen later that night, surrounded by stacks of paper that all pointed one way, straight at my brother. That night, I sat in Sandra's living room with an ice pack pressed against my swollen eye while she spoke in the soft, steady voice of someone accustomed to managing chaos. "Family betrayal cuts deeper than anything else," she said gently. "But you did the right thing confronting him. Now his reaction's on record. We can use that in court." She almost sounded energized by the prospect, like she'd been waiting for this next step. Her excitement should have raised alarms, but I was too grateful for her presence, for her certainty. I mistook control for compassion, mistook strategy for friendship. Sometimes the people who wound us the worst do it while promising to help us heal. Over the next 2 weeks, we built what looked like an airtight case against my brother. Sandra handled the details with unsettling precision. She produced mail forwarding forms allegedly bearing Dave's signature, doctored bank records with suspect transfers, and even statements from witnesses who swore they'd seen him at the post office while I was in Denver. It all seemed so complete, so perfectly aligned, that I never questioned how she gathered it so fast, or how she knew so much about postal systems and document authentication. I was a drowning man, and she offered me a raft woven from righteous anger and the illusion of justice. Naturally, I clung to it. Dave didn't take long to fight back. He hired an attorney, a sharp Denver lawyer who specialized in family disputes, and filed a defamation suit against both of us. She arrived in town carrying boxes of evidence that should have shattered my illusions completely. There were bank statements showing no unusual transactions, time-stamped footage proving Dave hadn't been near the post office on the days Sandra claimed, and signed affidavits from postal employees confirming they'd never seen him redirect anyone's mail. But Sandra had a calm, preloaded answer for everything. "His lawyer's just doing her job," she'd said with a confident smile. "Of course she'll try to muddy clean water. That's what a retainer buys." And I nodded, because it was easier to believe her than confront the creeping doubt inside me. The inconsistencies, the mismatched timestamps, the gaps in the postal log, they all whispered questions I didn't want to hear. When Dave's attorney filed motions to preserve discovery and demand access to Sandra's original exhibits, things escalated. The courthouse steps turned into a battlefield. Process servers found Dave twice in one day, once with a notice to compel disclosure, and again with a motion to freeze a credit line tied to his office building. Back home, a certified letter waited on his kitchen counter, its language cold and sterile. Default provisions, cross-collateralization, 30 days to cure. Lisa, his wife, had read it once, pressing her thumb into the paper like she could stop their world from caving in. "I can believe you," she whispered, "and still not survive this." I hadn't considered the collateral damage, the cost of believing the wrong person. Lisa had always been quiet, kind, the sort of woman who avoided gossip and community feuds. But the rumors proved relentless. People stared at her in grocery aisles, lowered their voices at the library where she worked. Finally, she broke. "I can't keep doing this," she told Dave during what became their final argument. "I believe you're innocent, but I can't let our kids grow up under this." She packed up the children and moved in with her sister in Colorado Springs, leaving Dave alone with unpaid bills and an empty house. His once busy contracting firm was collapsing, employees scattering to competitors, clients canceling contracts before they turned toxic by association. What gutted me most were his phone calls. He'd call Sandra's house, knowing I was there, leaving messages that grew smaller and sadder each time. "Mike, please, talk to me. We can fix this. I don't understand what's happening, but we're brothers." Sandra always intercepted them, her voice a calm scalpel. "He's manipulating you," she'd say. "This is classic abuser behavior. Gaslight, deny, then play the victim. Don't fall for it." Her confidence sounded professional, almost clinical, and I never stopped to ask how a retired HOA president knew so much about psychological tactics and fraud dynamics. I just believed her. Then one afternoon, Dave showed up at Sandra's front door. I saw him through the blinds, hollow-eyed, exhausted, sitting in his truck for 10 minutes before forcing himself out. When Sandra opened the door, her tone shifted. No warmth, no sympathy, just cold authority. "Dave Torres, you are not welcome on my property," she said sharply. "Michael has made his wishes clear. If you continue to harass him, I'll contact the authorities." Dave tried to look past her, to find me standing behind her shoulder. "Mike," he called, voice breaking. "Please. I swear on Sarah's grave, I never touched your mail." Hearing Sarah's name, my late wife's, hit me like a gut punch. But before I could move, Sandra slammed the door. She turned toward me, eyes blazing with false outrage. "Did you hear that?" she snapped. "He used your wife's memory to manipulate you. That's exactly the kind of emotional blackmail I've been warning you about." And I believed her. God help me, I believed her. By the end of that month, Dave's business was gone. His staff had left, his contracts were terminated, and the bank was preparing to seize his building. The man who had once co-signed my loan, who'd helped me start over after Sarah's death, had been completely dismantled, by my hand, guided by hers. The man who had co-signed my loan and helped me build my dream of mountain living was now staring down bankruptcy, because of accusations I had helped spread. But instead of feeling vindicated, I felt hollow. Sandra had promised that justice would feel cleansing, that watching Dave face the fallout of his supposed crimes would bring closure. Instead, it felt like watching a slow-motion car crash, one I'd started but couldn't stop. My phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. "Stop digging or your brother pays the price. You have 24 hours to leave town permanently." It should have terrified me. It should have made me question everything. Instead, it felt like proof we were hitting a nerve, that whoever was behind the scheme was growing desperate. I showed the text to Sandra, expecting fear or concern for Dave. Instead, she smiled. Not long after, Jenny Johnson appeared at Sandra's front door like an angel of revelation. She looked exhausted, her hand protectively resting on her pregnant belly, 7 months along, maybe more. Her eyes darted nervously toward the street before she whispered, "Mrs. Williams isn't home. I saw her drive off 20 minutes ago. We need to talk now." There was something in her urgency that made me step aside and let her in. Jenny was the woman whose family had been living in my cabin, the one who'd looked at me with pity when I'd been arrested. If she was risking Sandra's fury by showing up here, she must have known something important. What she showed me on her phone shattered the last of my illusions. Shaky footage, clearly filmed from hiding, captured Sandra Williams making near-daily trips to my old house for months. Around 10 every morning, she'd park at the curb, check the mailbox, and stuff fistfuls of envelopes into a canvas bag before leaving. The timestamps proved it. She'd been collecting my mail the entire time I'd been in Denver. "I thought it was strange," Jenny whispered, glancing toward the window as though Sandra might reappear at any second. "She told us you'd abandoned the house, that you'd been gone more than 2 years. But if that were true, why was mail still coming? Why did she need to grab it every single day?" The answer hit like a punch. Sandra had been intercepting my mail to make sure I never saw a single notice about what was happening to my property. But that was only the start. Jenny scrolled through hours of hidden footage, each clip worse than the last. Sandra was shown prowling around the neighborhood, installing what looked like listening devices near my cabin windows, photographing the house from every angle, even rummaging through my trash in the weeks before I left town. "She knew your schedule, Michael," Jenny said quietly. "When you left for work, when you came home, even what time you turned in for the night. She'd been watching you long before your dad got sick. The realization that I'd been under surveillance in my own home made my skin crawl. The invasion wasn't just physical, it was psychological, total. Then came the most damning video of all, one Jenny had captured by accident while filming her children playing in the backyard, my former backyard. Through the kitchen window, Sandra could be seen calmly feeding documents into a shredder. "Look at the date stamp," Jenny whispered. 3 days after we moved in. She was destroying evidence right there in what used to be your kitchen. The sight turned my stomach. When I'd left for Denver, that shredder had been in my home office, half full of my own files. Sandra had moved it into the kitchen, using my own equipment to erase her tracks with surgical precision. The casualness of it, the confidence, showed just how deliberate this all was. Jenny went on to explain that Sandra held master keys to every mailbox in the community, inherited through her daughter, who worked as the local postmaster. She said it was for HOA business, Jenny said bitterly, to help older residents who couldn't collect their mail. But she's been using those keys to cut people off, to isolate them. She takes their mail, intercepts their communication, then files paperwork declaring them dead or unfit. The scope of the operation was staggering. This wasn't just about my cabin, it was a network. Sandra had been targeting vulnerable property owners for years, using her roles in the HOA and postal access to create legal pathways for seizing homes. I thought of all the elderly residents who'd moved away suddenly in recent years. All the houses that went up for sale right after their owners supposedly passed. How many of those deaths had been just as fictional as mine? Jenny's next revelation chilled me to the bone. From her bag, she pulled a spiral notebook she'd found in Sandra's unlocked car. Inside were detailed psychological profiles, pages of observations about people in the community, notes about their finances, their families, their fears. "She does this to seniors too," Jenny said, flipping through the pages. "Cuts off contact, then plays the savior until they depend completely on her version of reality." I flipped to a page that stopped my breath. My own name, Michael Torres, written at the top. Beneath it, notes about my grief after Sarah's death, my estranged relationship with Dave, my tendency to isolate when under stress. Sandra hadn't just studied me, she'd dissected me. She'd studied me like a scientist studying a lab rat, charting every reaction, knowing exactly which buttons to press to make me dance to her rhythm. As Jenny prepared to leave, her eyes flicked between her phone and the window. Her husband was tracking Sandra's location in real time. Before stepping out, she paused, her face pale with urgency. "Michael, there's something else. Sandra's been talking about Phase 2, about your family. I don't know the details, but she mentioned your brother. She's not finished with your house. She wants to ruin anyone who might help you rebuild." The words landed like a punch to the gut. Dave wasn't collateral damage. He was a target. A threat to the story Sandra had so carefully engineered. As Sandra's headlights swept across the driveway, Jenny slipped out the back door. Before disappearing into the trees, she pressed a small flash drive into my hand. "Everything's on here, all the proof you'll need. But be careful who you trust. Sandra has allies in places you'd never expect." I watched her vanish into the woods, the sound of her footsteps fading beneath the hum of Sandra's engine. My nightmare hadn't ended. It was only beginning to reveal its true scale. The flash drive opened to a gallery of methodical cruelty. Rows of names, color-coded boxes, and cryptic notes. Sandra had logged people the way a park ranger might record weather, names, dates, changes. Only her colors marked lives unraveling. Green squares beside phone icons. Yellow bands through contact lists. Red linked to deeds and sale prices. The final row was black. At the center was my name, glowing like a warning light beside a progress bar that shouldn't exist for the living. Dave's entry wasn't far below, annotated like a work order. She wasn't just seizing homes, she was silencing anyone who might pull the thread. Each victim's file read like a study in predation: elderly widows with distant children, retirees who'd fled city stress for solitude, and younger people like me, isolated by grief and loss. She'd mapped out every relationship. Faces went pale as people recognized names from Sandra's records, loved ones who'd died under suspiciously convenient circumstances. Sandra took the podium dressed in her usual armor of authority, Navy blazer, HOA pin gleaming under the fluorescent lights, a folder clutched like a weapon. Her poise was flawless, her expression calm, her performance rehearsed. "Friends and neighbors," she began, voice honeyed and deliberate, the cadence of someone used to being obeyed. "We're here tonight because one of our residents has been making serious and dangerous accusations, claims that threaten the unity of our community." She turned toward me with a look that mimicked concern. Michael Torres, who many of you know has suffered greatly since his father's passing, has become convinced of a conspiracy involving myself and this organization. His behavior has grown erratic and troubling. She had the crowd listening, heads nodding, sympathy shifting her way. I could see her recalibrating in real time, measuring faces, weighing reactions, molding herself to whatever the room wanted to see. The presentation she'd prepared was a masterpiece of deceit, charts citing grief-induced psychosis, forged legal paperwork about supposed property disputes, and witness statements from neighbors willing to testify about my alleged instability. And still, despite the mask, I could see it in her eyes, that cold calculation beneath the charm. She wasn't defending herself. She was staging her final performance, betting she could bury the truth one last time before it buried her. She even produced psychological evaluations that supposedly proved I was suffering from paranoid delusions, complete with official letterhead, signatures, and formatting so precise that anyone glancing at them would swear they were real. "Mental illness is a serious issue that affects many families in our community," she continued, her voice sliding into the soft cadence of compassion. "Michael needs treatment, not validation for his conspiracy theories. These accusations are not only false, they're hurting innocent people who've dedicated their lives to making this neighborhood better." She was rewriting the story in real time, framing my entire ordeal as a public health crisis rather than a criminal conspiracy, a benevolent leader trying to save a troubled man from himself. It was manipulation disguised as mercy. When I stepped to the microphone, the air in the room seemed to hold its breath. Camera shutters clicked. The low hum of recording gear filled the silence. My hands trembled, not from fear, but from the tidal rush of knowing the moment had finally come. Everything Sandra had stolen, my home, my brother, my sanity, was about to turn against her in the one place she couldn't control, the public eye. "Ladies and gentlemen," I began, my voice steadier than I dared to hope, "Sandra Williams has been systematically murdering members of this community for the past 5 years." The reaction hit like a wave. Gasps, whispers, the collective shuffle of 300 people realizing they might not know the truth about their own town. Behind me, a large projection screen flickered to life. My first slide was Sandra's victim chart, 47 faces lined up beside false death dates and property transfers. The effect was immediate and devastating. People recognized those faces. Neighbors, friends, parents. The room rippled with shock as grief collided with recognition. "These people didn't die of natural causes," I said, using a laser pointer to trace the pattern of deaths. "And they didn't abandon their homes. They were erased, on paper, so Sandra Williams could take what they owned and sell it." I pointed to each case like opening old graves. Mrs. Henderson, Oak Street, listed as heart failure last spring. She's alive, living under a false name in Arizona, unaware she's legally dead. Mr. Peterson, declared incompetent, institutionalized, and stripped of assets. He's in Utah, confused why his children can't reach him. The room shifted from disbelief to horror as neighbors began connecting their own memories, those sudden departures, the unexplained estate sales, the hollow condolences. Then Jenny's video filled the screen, and everything changed. You could feel 300 people lean forward at once, the scrape of chairs, a single stifled sob when the timestamp appeared. I didn't narrate. I didn't have to. The footage spoke for itself, Sandra rifling through mail, shredding documents in what used to be my kitchen. A man in the third row clapped a hand over his mouth. Someone near the exit whispered, "That's my mother's envelope color," and sank back into their chair. I let one line cut through the stunned silence. "This is how you erase a person. Cut the lines, bury the notices, and make the paperwork tell the lie." Sandra's face went pale, not at the evidence, but at the realization that the illusion was gone. "He's mentally ill," she shouted, springing to her feet with theatrical precision. "Look at his history. He attacked his own brother. This is fabricated evidence, the work of a man in the middle of a psychotic break. I've been trying to help him, and this is how he repays me, with delusions and slander. Her voice cracked with righteous fury, honed by years of HOA speeches and conflict mediation. She still had that aura of authority, the tone that made people trust her, defer to her. "Michael Torres is dangerous," she declared, turning to the crowd like a prosecutor addressing a jury. "He's manipulating all of you with elaborate fantasies. Look at the dates. These documents have been altered. Why would a grieving man, who's lost so much, invent something this cruel unless he's lost touch with reality?" Her performance was flawless, desperate, but convincing enough to make a few heads turn in hesitation. She wasn't just denying guilt, she was spinning the story one last time. But the recording that followed shattered every illusion. Her own voice filled the room, crisp, cold, unmistakable. "Isolation is 90% of the work," the audio began. "Once they can't communicate with the outside world, they're already dead. The paperwork just makes it official. Patience is key. You have to let them accept the new reality before moving to the final phase." The silence afterward was suffocating. Then a voice broke from the back, raw, trembling. "Oh my God! That's exactly what happened to my mother." A murmur spread through the hall, a rising wave of recognition and horror as family after family began realizing that their losses, the ones they'd written off as fate, had been orchestrated by the woman standing before them. Sandra's mask finally cracked. And for the first time, the crowd saw her not as a leader, but as the architect of their grief. The domino effect hit faster than I could have imagined, unfolding with a sharp, almost poetic precision. It started in the back of the room. County Postmaster, Rebecca Williams, Sandra's daughter, stood trembling, tears streaking her face as she confessed in front of everyone. Her voice broke as she admitted to giving her mother the master mailbox keys, helping intercept residents' mail for years. "I thought we were helping elderly people who couldn't manage their mail," she cried, her sobs raw, unpolished, the sound of someone realizing too late what they'd been part of. "Mom told me their families asked us to help sort their bills and letters. I didn't know she was stealing from them. I swear I didn't know." That was the crack that brought the whole structure down. One by one, others began stepping forward, clerks, assistants, neighbors who'd played small roles thinking they were helping with paperwork. They were desperate to separate themselves from Sandra's shadow, spilling names, dates, and transactions that mapped out the full scope of her network. The county clerk, the same one who'd been quietly certifying deaths that never happened, tried to slip out a side door, only to run face first into a wall of furious neighbors who now knew exactly who he was. When the agents reached him, the only lenses that mattered were the ones on their lapel cameras and the forensic cart behind them. The chain of custody began right there in the hallway, badges flashing, evidence bags opening, signatures marking the first moments of accountability after years of manufactured confusion. Local news cameras swiveled in unison as blue FBI windbreakers wove through the crowd. Wrist mics crackled, label printers hissed, evidence sleeves sealed shut. The room transformed into a living inventory of justice, a scene that documented itself. Hands rose. HOA pins were unfastened and dropped into bags. One clerk stared at his own name tag before it was tagged and logged. The collapse of Sandra's empire had a sound to it, the clatter of folding chairs and the scrape of metal on polished concrete, the soundtrack of order reclaiming chaos. Sandra's final moments of freedom were everything I'd imagined and more. When the agents approached with handcuffs, she tried to run. 60 years old, still in her navy blazer and low heels, she moved with the wild panic of a trapped animal. She didn't get far. Her shoe caught on a folding chair, sending her sprawling onto the cold community center floor. She actually crawled, across the concrete while hundreds of her former neighbors recorded her downfall on their phones. The woman who'd once orchestrated death with the calm precision of a bureaucrat was now clawing at the ground, her power gone, her mask shattered. Her blazer was ripped, her HOA pin crushed underfoot, her hair tangled and matted from the fall. "This isn't over, Michael!" she screamed, the handcuffs snapping shut around her wrists. The authority was gone from her voice. What came out was raw, jagged fury. "Check your father's medical records. You don't know how deep this goes. They killed him too, and you're too stupid to see it." The words were meant to wound, but they landed like the last gasps of a broken woman still trying to control the story. Agents read her rights as she thrashed and cursed, her shouts echoing through the room until the door to the custody van closed behind her. Within minutes, the videos were online, her downfall broadcast across the same social media channels she'd once used to manipulate public opinion. The aftermath was chaos, but for once, it was the good kind. Families lined up to give statements to federal agents. Journalists finally told the stories they'd been chasing for years. For the first time, the victims and their loved ones weren't just whispers in paperwork. They were visible, heard, and believed. 5 years in federal prison. $500,000 in restitution. Every asset seized and liquidated. The system gave her everything it could, and somehow, it still didn't feel like justice was enough. 6 months later, the sentencing drew national attention. The Denver federal courthouse was packed. Families of victims, reporters, and strangers who'd followed the Mountain Ridge property murder scandal online. Sandra had aged decades in custody. Gone was the polished professional. In her place stood a hollow-eyed woman stripped of the polish that had once disguised her rot. When Judge Morgan asked if she wished to speak, she rose, still clinging to her warped sense of righteousness. "I needed money for my grandson's medical bills," she said flatly, as though confessing to a parking violation. These people were isolated. Their homes were falling apart. I was protecting the neighborhood's value. I was helping. The gall of it drew an audible murmur through the courtroom. Judge Morgan didn't hesitate. His voice was sharp enough to cut glass. "Mrs. Williams, you had options. You could have asked your community for help. You could have organized fundraisers, sought charity, or even asked the very families you exploited for compassion. Instead, you chose to murder people on paper, destroy their families, and steal the fruits of their lives for your personal gain. For that, this court sentences you to 5 years in federal prison with no chance of early parole. All criminally acquired assets will be seized and liquidated to compensate your victims." The gavel came down with a crack that sounded like a gunshot, the final punctuation to a reign built on lies and stolen lives. Sandra Williams' empire of fraud and fear ended not with whispers, but with applause echoing off marble walls, a sound that marked both justice and the long road toward healing. Justice didn't show up wrapped in a ribbon. It arrived in envelopes, missed voicemails, and a house key I wasn't sure I wanted anymore.